You wake up, no alarm, no phone, no notification telling you that Karen from accounting liked your post, just silence. And the sun, and the terrifying realization that you have absolutely nothing scheduled for the next 16 hours except survive. That was every single day for our ancestors. And when you actually start thinking about it, really thinking about it, a question that sounds almost embarrassingly simple becomes one of the most fascinating rabbit holes in all of human history. What did ancient humans actually do all day? Because here's the thing, we know a lot about what they built. We know about pyramids, aqueducts, cave paintings, bronze swords. We know about wars, gods, and emperors. But what about Tuesday afternoon? What about the 3 hours between lunch and dinner for a guy living 40,000 years ago? What was he doing? Well, ancient humans, and we're talking deep time here, think hunter-gatherer societies going back tens of thousands of years, did not have mornings the way we have mornings. No coffee, no scrolling, no staring blankly at the ceiling for 20 minutes pretending you're still asleep. They woke up with the sun, which sounds poetic until you realize it means 4:30 a.m. in summer and the middle of the night in winter, because ancient humans were not working with daylight saving time adjustments. And here's something genuinely wild. Anthropologists and sleep researchers who study modern hunter-gatherer communities, groups like the Hadza in Tanzania or the San People of southern Africa, have found that these communities don't actually sleep in one long 8-hour block the way we do. They sleep in fragments. They wake up in the middle of the night, they chat for a bit, they go back to sleep. Researchers call this segmented sleep, and it turns out this might actually be how human bodies naturally want to sleep, before electric light forced us into a rigid schedule. So your ancient ancestors' morning probably started earlier than yours, was colder, smellier, and involved absolutely zero espresso. But weirdly, they might have been more rested than you are right now. Let that sink in. The first order of business, when you did wake up in the ancient world, fire. If the fire from the night before had gone out, someone had the wonderful job of starting it again from scratch. And before you picture someone cheerfully rubbing two sticks together like it's summer camp, understand that fire starting with primitive tools, before the invention of the bow drill, could take anywhere from 10 minutes to a complete emotional breakdown, depending on humidity and the psychological fortitude of the person doing it. Fire wasn't optional. Fire was warmth, safety, light, cooking, protection from predators, and group morale all rolled into one glowing bundle of necessity. You did not skip the fire. The fire was non-negotiable. Now, here's a statistic that tends to surprise people. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies suggest that obtaining food typically takes between 2 to 5 hours per day. Not 8, not 10, about 2 to 5. After that, there's a lot of not much structured activity at all. In the 1960s, anthropologist Marshall Salins famously argued that hunter-gatherers were the original affluent society, not because they were rich, but because they had fewer needs and more leisure time than practically anyone living in modern industrial civilization, which is a very polite academic way of saying ancient humans worked significantly less than you do and they didn't have student loans. But let's not romanticize it too much. The 2 to 5 hours you spent gathering food was genuinely brutal. You were covering large distances on foot. You were foraging in environments that actively wanted to kill you. You were hunting animals that did not appreciate the attention. And if today's hunt or forage came up empty, tomorrow was going to be very unpleasant. There was no safety net. There was no "we'll order pizza instead." Either the world provided or it didn't. The actual act of hunting is worth pausing on because popular imagination tends to get it completely wrong. We picture ancient humans dramatically chasing a mammoth at full sprint, spear raised, muscles gleaming. What actually happened was much more like a very slow, very tiring chess match. Persistence hunting, a strategy used by many early humans, involved following an animal for hours, sometimes all day, not to catch it in a burst of speed, but to exhaust it. Humans are uniquely terrible at raw speed, but extraordinary at sustained endurance. We sweat, most animals don't, they pant. So you walk after an animal, it runs, it stops, it overheats. You keep walking, it runs again, you keep walking for 6, 7, 8 hours in the midday heat until finally the animal is so exhausted it simply gives up and accepts its fate. This is persistence hunting. It's real, it was documented, and it is objectively the most stubborn thing any creature has ever done in the history of planet Earth. Ancient humans didn't outrun their prey, they outbored it into submission. Once food was secured, the rest of the day opened up. And here's where things get interesting, because what filled those hours says a lot about what humans fundamentally are. One of the most underappreciated facts about ancient humans is how intensely social they were. Not in a wholesome, we're all in this together, inspirational poster kind of way. More in a, we will literally die if we are separated from our group kind of way. Social bonds were survival infrastructure. Knowing who to trust, who was reliable, who was secretly eating more than their share of the berries, This was critical intelligence, and the primary mechanism for maintaining those bonds was, and I cannot stress this enough, gossip. Yes, our ancient ancestors gossiped, enthusiastically, constantly. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, who famously proposed the concept of Dunbar's number, the idea that humans can maintain stable social relationships with roughly 150 people, also argued that language itself evolved partly as a form of social grooming. Primates groom each other physically to strengthen bonds. Humans, at some point, figured out you could do the same thing with words, talking about each other. Who did what, who's reliable, who tried to take the biggest piece of mammoth, who's been acting weird lately, was literally one of the first uses of complex language. The first conversations in human history were not philosophical discussions about the nature of existence. They were, in all likelihood, "Did you see what Og did yesterday?" If you've ever felt guilty about gossiping, you can now tell yourself you're engaging in an evolutionarily ancient social bonding ritual. You're welcome. Physical grooming was also a major daily activity. Picking parasites, lice, ticks, other unpleasant passengers out of each other's hair wasn't just hygiene, it was intimacy. It was how you showed someone you valued them. Among primates, grooming is the primary currency of social trust. Among early humans, it was exactly the same, which is either very sweet or very itchy, depending on your perspective. The point is that a significant portion of the ancient human day was spent in physical proximity with other people, touching them, talking to them, paying attention to them, not because they were being nice, because being disconnected from your group was a death sentence, and every moment of social investment was an act of survival. Children were everywhere, and they needed to learn everything. Ancient human groups had children constantly, and those children had to absorb the entire knowledge base of their community from scratch: which plants were edible, which were poisonous, how to track animals, how to make tools, how to read weather patterns, how to navigate by stars. There was no curriculum, there was no classroom, there was watching, imitating, and occasionally being corrected when you tried to eat a berry that would have killed you. Play, for ancient human children, was essentially vocational training in disguise. When children played at hunting, they were practicing hunting. When they imitated adults making tools, they were learning tool making. Studies of children in hunter-gatherer communities today show that kids are given extraordinary amounts of autonomy. They're allowed to use sharp objects, build fires, participate in adult tasks from a much younger age than we would consider acceptable in modern society. A 5-year-old with a knife was not an emergency. It was Tuesday. Adults spent considerable time teaching, watching children, and passing on what we might call the oral encyclopedia of their group. Every plant name, every animal behavior, every seasonal pattern, every practical skill that kept the group alive. This knowledge, transmitted through story and demonstration and endless repetition, was the most valuable thing any human community possessed. Losing it, through the death of elders, through group fragmentation, could mean extinction. The stories told around fires weren't entertainment, they were the internet. Somewhere between surviving and resting, ancient humans spent a remarkable amount of time making things: stone tool production, knapping. The process of striking flint to create sharp edges was a skill that took years to master. You didn't just pick up a rock and create a hand axe. You selected your raw material carefully. You understood the properties of different stones. You struck with precise force at precise angles. Archaeologists who learn to knap stone today describe it as roughly as difficult as learning to play a musical instrument. It required patience, practice, an understanding of physics, and a fairly high tolerance for accidentally hitting your own thumb. And people didn't only make tools, they made things that served no practical survival purpose whatsoever. Beads, carved figures, pigment mixtures applied to cave walls in colors that have survived 40,000 years. Musical instruments, bone flutes, have been found in Europe dated to over 40,000 years old. Someone, in between hunting and foraging and starting fires and managing group politics, sat down and made a flute out of a vulture bone and then played it. That person was not surviving, that person was living. And there's a difference. The cave paintings at Lascaux, the Venus figurines, the personal ornaments made from shells carried hundreds of kilometers from the coast. The creativity of ancient humans consistently startles archaeologists who expect to find evidence of brute practicality and instead find evidence of people who were, in the truest sense, artists. These people, dealing with hunger and cold and disease and predators and the full brutality of existence without modern medicine or technology, still found time to make beautiful things, still felt the need to make beautiful things. That need appears to be as fundamental to us as the need to eat, which is extraordinary, and a little bit moving if you let yourself think about it. When ancient humans weren't actively doing something, the nature of their rest was itself very different from ours. They talked, they slept in those fragmented patterns, they watched the world around them with an an attention that modern humans have almost entirely lost, because for them, watching the world was information gathering. Noticing that the birds were behaving strangely meant a storm was coming. Noticing that the herd animals were moving in a certain direction meant something was happening ahead of them. Passive observation was active intelligence work. Sitting still was never actually empty time. They also played. Adults, not just children. Games, competitions, laughter, storytelling. Evidence from observed hunter-gatherer communities shows that humor is essentially universal and constant. People in survival mode societies joke all the time. Teasing, wordplay, absurdist stories, merciless mockery of anyone who tripped over something. Laughter seems to be something humans do the moment they have any energy left over from surviving, which suggests that somewhere deep in the operating system of being human, finding things funny is nearly as fundamental as finding food. The comedian and the hunter appear to have been equally essential to group cohesion. They also argued, groups of humans in close proximity sharing resources does not create perfect harmony. It creates complicated, messy, negotiated coexistence. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer groups document constant conflict resolution, status negotiation, and the management of freeloaders, individuals who take more than they contribute. Ancient human societies were remarkably egalitarian compared to what came later, but that egalitarianism was actively maintained, not naturally occurring. It required constant social work. The mechanisms for handling conflict were social: public shaming, ridicule, ostracism, the threat of exclusion, the village council, the public conversation, the collective decision. These are extraordinarily old. Democracy, in the loosest sense of the word, may be one of the most ancient human institutions we have. Then, around 10 to 12,000 years ago, something shifted. As in multiple places across the world, more or less independently, humans began cultivating plants and domesticating animals. Agriculture. And this is where the daily schedule gets a very different answer, because farming, at least early farming, was not the liberation from hard work that it might appear. It was, in many ways, significantly harder and more monotonous than hunter-gathering. You were now tied to a single location. You were dependent on weather and disease in ways nomadic foragers were not. The variety of food decreased dramatically. The hours of physical labor increased dramatically. Studies comparing skeletal remains from hunter-gatherer populations and early agricultural populations show something striking. Farmers were shorter, had more nutritional deficiencies, more dental problems, more repetitive stress injuries from the same motion repeated thousands of times per day. The agricultural revolution was great for human civilization as a long-term project, and absolutely brutal for the individual human beings living through it day by day. Nobody in the ancient Near East 10,000 years ago looked at the invention of farming and said, yes, this is going to work out great for me personally. They were just trying to eat. A farmer's day was structured entirely around the crops: planting, weeding, irrigating, harvesting, processing grain, which before mills meant grinding by hand for hours every single day, feeding animals, managing storage against pests and rot and theft. All of this added up to a workday that made the hunter-gatherer's 2 to 5 hour foraging session look like a weekend retreat. And unlike hunting, which at least had the narrative excitement of a chase, grinding grain for 3 hours every morning is almost entirely devoid of drama. Ancient farmers were, by most measures, working harder and eating less varied food than their nomadic predecessors. The upside was stability, the ability to store food and support more people in one place, which meant specialization eventually became possible. Some people could spend their days doing something other than food production, making pottery, building structures, trading, governing, writing things down. Civilization, in other words. But for the average person, life got significantly more scheduled, significantly more exhausting, and significantly more beige. So, what did ancient humans do during the day? They woke up early and started a fire. They went out and found food, either by gathering or by the world's most determined walking. They spent significant time in social connection, which meant talking, grooming, gossiping, teaching children, and arguing about who ate whose berries. They made tools, and sometimes they made art, and sometimes they made music on instruments carved from the bones of birds. They rested in ways that were more fragmented and observational than our modern rest. They laughed. They told stories around fires that doubled as entertainment and survival manuals simultaneously. They went to sleep, probably woke up in the middle of the night, chatted a bit, and then slept again until the sun told them it was time to do everything over. There's something striking about looking at this list. Strip away the absence of technology, and what you have is a life organized around the things humans seem to be fundamentally built for: movement, social connection, creativity, problem solving, rest, and humor. We've added a lot since then. Agriculture, writing, cities, the internet, streaming services, an alarming number of subscription boxes. But underneath all of it, the basic operating system appears to be the same one that was running 40,000 years ago around a fire somewhere on a savanna. The ancient human who finished the day's foraging and sat down to carve a bone flute wasn't so different from someone who finishes a shift and immediately wants to make something just because they feel like it. The people debating around the fire about who wasn't pulling their weight were running the first meeting in recorded prehistory, and the person who woke up in the middle of the night couldn't get back to sleep and lay there staring upward thinking about nothing and everything at once. That's just Tuesday. It has always been Tuesday.